Hello and welcome to another episode of Throttle Stop Garage. Today we find ourselves here at episode 45 with still a few things left to clean up on the frame. So we've got to get the transmission mount welded on. We've got to get everything prepped for paint. I mean, that's what's probably going to take the entire episode. Right, so the mill scale's got to come off. The frame, I'm going to deal with it the best way that I can. I'm just going to try to sand most of it off. Paint will stick to it, sure. But then you've painted the mill scale. You haven't painted the metal. And the idea is to get the metal coated. So that's the correct operation for epoxy priming, is to get all the mill scale removed from your steel parts. Then go ahead and get your epoxy priming done. Once it's epoxy primed though, it's just, this is like a ground coat. I'm just trying to hold things for now. I know that I can't weld the frame up and under the car just yet. I'm going to get a bunch of the other stuff prepped. That'll be in a later episode, probably 46, when we get moved on to some of the other parts. But at this point in time, I just like to finish this part of it. I mean, I've been on this for too long already. If I can get the mill scale chopped off, if I can get the pieces welded on for the transmission mount. And I also found the transmission mount's a little flexy. So I'd like to take some of the flex out of that. If I can get those little things done, then basically the frame can get wrapped up. It can get welded in at any time. But for me to get the engine out as we stand here on the project, a lot easier for me to remove this engine if the frame isn't in the car and I can just dump it out the bottom and pull it out. But before I do that, I need to get mounted in. I need to get the radiator mounted, the intercooler mounted. I need to get an exhaust, at least the header built for the turbo, and I need to get an intake done. So I'm intending to get all of those things finalized and finished up in the next, well, it won't be the next few episodes because I got some other things that I have to do before all of that happens. Just recognize these are all things going on in my head. And we got to get those things wrapped before we can go and pull this thing out. When the engine comes out for the last time, the next time the engine goes in, it'll be as a completed engine. That's the idea. Anyway, so let's, enough babbling out of me. Let's switch over and have a look at how all of this is going to unfold. Alright, so mill scale, we all hate it, but first up we've got to get the foot pedal mount plate put in place, so that it just involves a little bit of that weld through primer, and then we get going. So first I used that purple disc. This actually took almost 2 days to do, and then it didn't work as well as it has in the past. It just mill scale, I guess, comes in different thicknesses, and it was so thick on these rails that I had bent that the purple pad was just clogging up. So first I broke it with the grinder with that flex disc on it, and then the purple pad was able to do what it always does, which is clean it up. And then I started in just sanding it off. I didn't want to, remove all the welds and things. I just wanted to make sure it was nice and clean. You have to be really, really careful with the grinder though, so you don't make any big gouges and other grind marks. I didn't want any of that on these frame rails for no reason. Like, I'm going to be coating this stuff with bed liner, and it's really no big deal. I just really, I guess I'm just far too picky probably for, making fast progress anyway. Anyway, so I actually ended up destroying that little die grinder entirely doing this. Then the dual action sander comes out, and it's just putting a final, like that was 120 grit finish on these rails, which you'll see in a minute was a complete waste of time. Try to get into the corners and all the other areas with the small file. I then went out and blasted these other parts, right? So there's the transmission cross member ready to go. So I bead blasted those, bead blasted the cross member piece, and then got ready to go there. Right, so now I'm doing something very foolish. So I'm just drilling the holes in the end of this thing. It did end up it didn't end up killing me anyways. It was not a fun job. It was kind of like Groundhog Day. This is the 5th of May. Here we are again, half covered in snow. So, I guess we better head in and get to work. I really have a choice. Thought I might do some yard work this weekend. Not gonna miss not doing that. Okay, so this is what we got done yesterday. We've got the frame now sanded. Oh, getting that mill scale off was terrible. So that's all now actually looking really good. Nice and smooth. Ready to go. Today we'll get finished putting all the rest of this stuff on. At least that's the hope. So, geez, these full days spent just doing stuff that ends up not looking like progress. Well, I guess that's the nature of the game. Anyway, let's carry on. So with day 1 done, day 2 saw me starting off by putting these aluminum 2x2 tubes on. That's just to simulate the floor level. Again, I'm going to mount the transmission crossmember in. I know the floor's flat across that area, and I don't want these things not to fit when I get the frame off and up and underneath the thing. So I clecoed it in place underneath the car so I know roughly where it goes, and now I'm going to get things tapped around so it sits flat and level as I get it welded onto the chassis itself. So on goes the transmission cross member, and then actually then I'm going to mask it up here right away, right, and then shoot some of that primer in behind it, and then we'll weld it all in place. So this is again just sort of epic piles of time that end up looking like almost nothing. There we go with the welder. We break it out. We get these things smacked in. I welded up the corners full. Again, I'm going to be like seam sealing the heck out of this thing when I'm done. I don't know why I'm so nervous about rust. It's like not like I'm going to be driving this car in a swamp or something. So I just sort of freak out about it, and for no good reason other than I started building cars when I lived in the UK for a little while, and I've had to deal with rusty, crappy cars all my life ever since then because I know how to fix them. So I'd rather not have the work that I do become completely destroyed later on by simply rusting it out by not doing your work carefully. Alright, so up on that front steering box, I've welded the inside corners. It's now fully welded all the way around, so it's as good as that's ever going to get. But I'm starting to recognize it's going to be a bit of a pain to paint it. Alright, so I said that cross member was a bit flexy, so I spent probably half an hour, maybe an hour, getting it to lie flat on those two parts. And then I'm adding some angle into this simply to tie the two walls together. As soon as you tie the two walls together structurally, like the two sides, the two edges, then that becomes, it basically behaves like a solid beam, which is a great thing structurally. Again, no chance for the welds with the triangles inverted that way, and I TIG welded. It's all upside down TIG too, right? So don't become a internet weld inspector on these ones. They're as good as it gets for welding out of position. And I could have taken it out of there to weld it all up, but I was afraid that it was going to move or otherwise distort. So I was using the frame in that case as my jig to hold everything flat and stable. Everything was just tough all the way around. Thank goodness I have a flex head on that TIG. Alright, so with all of that done, it's time to just do some of the last little finish touches on the thing. Just, touch up some of the welds, make sure I've got the areas ground off that I think I need ground off. And then I made the final decision on this particular frame, which is I couldn't figure out how to clean the front of this up. There was never going to be a way that I was going to get it all cleaned without spending at least another 2 or 3 days doing it. So I contacted a local sandblasting outfit and took it into them. But first I thought, I better get the insides clean. So out comes a broom and some Varsol, and insides get cleaned. So I cleaned them front and back and did the best I could. Now that foot pedal piece has to get welded on. Is now I've got a timeline, right? Got to hit the sandblaster on time, so no rest for the wicked here. And get all the rest of it touched up in time for this thing to get out the door. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Okay, so fresh in from the blaster. All the rust is taken off that front cross member, but it doesn't matter. All right, but all the weld areas are clean and cleared, and that was the important part. There's really no way to effectively get some of these corners, areas like those upper control arm mounts, the insides of these frame rails. It's just, there's no way to get this stuff perfectly clean, other than sandblasting, that I can access anyway. So real happy with the way this all turned out. Like areas, you know, inside these corners, just terrible to try to prep. You still have to prep it, like it's just been, you know, fresh blasted. There's still a few areas in here that are going to need a little, you know, tidying up by me by hand, and I got one or two other little things left to do, but we should be able to, well, we'll get it into primer here right away. I don't want to leave this metal out any longer than is absolutely necessary.
Alright, so once it's back from the blaster, we got to get it ready to get into paint. Now the blaster didn't get, I don't know if you rewind quickly, you can see there's lots of areas this guy didn't manage to get. Anyways, it wasn't expensive to do. It was about $100 to have it blasted, but the difficult areas at the front of the frame were reasonably well done, with the exception of the engine mounts, which didn't actually get the mill scale knocked off of them. And then I really wanted the insides of those frame rails done nicely. Again, they're probably never going to see any moisture or water, but I want them sealed up well. So this was a full day, actually a full day of finished prep work here. A couple little spots with the MIG just touching up things. You can see it after it gets blasted, right? You see some of these areas where, oh, you know, I've missed a weld. So in you go and you get it done. So then I sanded off the coarse texture of the sandblasting. It's not necessary to do that. The sandblast surface is a perfect surface to prime to. I just wanted it a little smoother. Again, no reason, I'm just that way. It's just easier to clean it, like that sandblasted surface. If you got your hands touch it or get any oils or grease from doing some of this work that I'm doing on it, it's a devil to get it off. So it's just easier if you sand it. It only took a few hours for me to buff this out. Then I'm adding in some holes right here, just drilling and tapping some holes directly into the frame to hold brake lines. So that has to get done. And then the back edges there where you saw me drill the holes with the big step drill, I was putting in, those are just for welding, right? So those are going to be where the button welds are going to go. Alright, so this is the final turnaround. Tap those M4 holes for the brake lines. And then we're going to pull her outside now that it's all sanded and ready to rock and roll. We've scuffed and sanded every element off. So in we go. Next up, we'll be painting. So in order to paint this stuff first, you got to start with the wax and grease remover. I'm doing this just out in my alley. Always trying to impress the neighbors, you know, painting out in the alley. So I got it set up there, and then you're going to blow it off with the tack rag and the gun. And the gun that I'm using here is an Ansett Iwata W400. It's a brand new gun to me. I've got the low pressure version of this gun. This is a more conventional gun, and it's got a big enough fluid tip in it to paint this primer. So it's a 1.4 millimeter fluid tip. A really good paint gun is not a cheap piece of kit. I've got several of them, and anyways, it isn't cheap, but boy, does it ever work good. This is right out of the box, so I'm playing with some of the settings as we go. Probably could have turned my fan down a little bit there. You can see the amount of overspray I'm getting, but I'm comfortable with that. It only took, what did it take? A little over about 1.5 liters worth of finished product to paint this twice, both inside and out. And it took a long time. Like each one of the paint sessions was at least 15 minutes long in order to get this coated, because you're dancing around through everything. It just takes forever to get this stuff done without runs and drools, and I did get a few of those, but for the most part this turned out really nicely. So pretty happy with the I've used these Iwata guns before, and they're absolutely fantastic, especially for guys with compressors at home. So they're not air pigs. I've got a big SATA jet and it's an air pig, but this thing's really efficient. So, and transfer efficiency is usually really high. I mean, you can see the overspray, but I mean, I'm just spraying tubes, so it's going to be everywhere. But if you're spraying on your car, the transfer efficiency is actually really high. Well, here it is, all primed.
It worked out pretty well. Happy with it. Finish is real nice. I mean, any errors here are my own, and there are a few. So it's a tough thing to paint. It's harder than it looks. So to get it to finish up nice was very difficult. The hardest area was the K-member. Getting paint in some of those round bolt hole areas was pretty difficult too, and I'm still not fully covered underneath that steering bracket. There's just no way to get it all in there. But I got some pretty good drills. There's the drills. Some pretty good drills in there. A couple other little places, really no big deal. Here, and I was painting inside the rail, but it's inside the rail, so who would care? Anyway, so that's good enough for now. So we'll, it's got it locked down. Pretty confident that that'll be good. A lot of work to get this done, just a ton of work. But you know, if you don't get that first epoxy primer coat down really nicely, then the whole rest of the job kind of falls apart after that. So, you know, that's why you do it the way you do it. You know, you want to make sure that you've got every little corner coated. That's why you break all the edges, all that kind of stuff, just to make sure everything's nice. Alright, so that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for tuning in to episode 45. There's a coat of very nice PPG DP48LV. Yeah, that's the right number. Epoxy primer. 2 coats on this. That's all that's required. Don't keep pounding the epoxy to it. It's not a finished coat. And again, the plan is just for this to hold the metal and prevent any sort of flash rust or other problems while we're busy dealing with doing all the other jobs on the car. And then we'll have to scuff it, prime it again, and then get it into color. So super happy with the way it all turned out. The finish is it's nice and smooth. There's no real, it's the particular primer. I really love this epoxy primer. I mean, of all the epoxies you can buy, it costs a pile of money though. I mean, I wish I could find a sort of competitive product for about half the price. At any rate, as always, I appreciate you tuning in. Like, subscribe, tell a friend, hey, buy a t-shirt. I'll have those for sale on Teespring, and we'll catch you on the next episode.